Hello everyone, thank you for joining us today. Apologies for the slight delay. We've had some technical difficulties on our side, but thank you for joining us and welcome to Series 3 of the GBA Lightbulb Sessions. The Great British Entrepreneur Award, in association with BT Skills for Tomorrow, have designed a free live stream series of Lightbulb Sessions to support small businesses and entrepreneurs with insightful and advice-driven sessions, featuring some of the UK's brilliant entrepreneurial minds to illuminate your path to entrepreneurial success. You can find out more about BT Skills for Tomorrow by heading to their website at www.bt.com/skills for tomorrow or by clicking on the link in the comment section. In today's session, Great British Entrepreneur Awards Head of Content Jonathan Davis will be speaking with Editorial Director of Fresh Business Thinking, Praseeda Nair. This session will offer top tips on how you can get your story out to the media and land the coverage you need in today's content-saturated world. Praseeda will cover how to find the most relevant reporters for your business interests and how to identify and craft your big pitch when reaching out. There is an opportunity to ask questions during this session. If you have a question you'd like to ask, you can pop this in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we'll do our best to answer these towards the end of the session. Please note there will be a poll at the end of the session, and this will be anonymous. And with that, I'll pass over to our host today, Jonathan Davis.
Yeah, thank you, Chloe. And just to reiterate again, apologies everyone for the delay. Today it's been 14 months into live streams and Zooms and webinars and video calls, and now is the time that we have decided to have some problems. So thank you so much for keeping with us, and thankfully we can get underway now. And thank you to Praseeda joining us today. I guess it'd be a good place to start to hear a bit more about yourself, what you do, and your career so far. Second Zoom thing. You're on mute, Praseeda.
What a day. What a day. I don't know if you follow astrology, but my mom's been sending me so many forwards about Mercury retrograde. And now I'm starting to believe her, because this is crazy. A series of technical glitches. Sorry about that. Okay, so a little bit about myself. I've been a journalist for a very long time. I don't want to date myself, but let's just say ages. I started out with broadsheet newspapers in the Middle East, and quickly worked across different desks, the news desk, even sports. And I'm not an expert, but that's the magic of being a journalist. You become an expert by talking to experts. Then I moved on to trade publications, business publications. And yeah, now I'm in the UK and with Fresh Business Thinking after about 5 years in the startup space. I feel like I've found my niche, and it's a great place to be.
Yeah, and what was it that drew you to kind of the business world and startups in particular?
You know, it was actually a happy accident, because I think a lot of young people who fall into journalism, and I mean, you're one of those people, so I'm sure we can relate on the same level there. There's something so alluring about being a journalist, right? You know, the media tells you, like I'm talking about movies and stuff, it's just so exciting. It's like you're uncovering something. So when I started out, I thought I'd be like jet setting and going undercover and doing exposés and wearing a wire. And that's not how it works. It is for some people, but those jobs are so rare. It's like gold dust. And it's not even all what it's cracked up to be. The reason I fell into business journalism was just a really, really just a happy coincidence, because there was an opportunity for a senior role. And this was really early in my career. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to take a chance. I don't have the experience, but I've got the gumption. And that's also another myth that we have, right? As long as you've got the gumption, you can make it work. But yeah, there's something so exciting about listening to entrepreneurial stories. It's got a natural human interest hook, because people who start businesses pour so much of themselves into it.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something that I've experienced, and you know, that's kind of the foundation of the Great British Entrepreneur Awards as well. It is the story, it's that human interest element, rather than you know, performance and bottom lines and spreadsheets and balance sheets, and so it is that real human connection. But today we're going to be talking about PR, getting your story out there into the press and into media. So let's start off with what do you look for in a story, and do you think that's changed over the course of your career and over the course of your time that you've been focusing on business and startups and entrepreneurs?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I think that a lot of times when I go on like panels or just talk to other people in our industry, other journalists, a lot of them talk about how audience behavior has changed. And a big part of my career has been rebranding and relaunching brands. So every time I've joined a publication, it's been completely uprooting what it stands for and trying to define our brand identity. A lot of media outlets forget that we're small businesses too, and we are on that similar growth journey. So there are growing pains. A lot of the times when I join teams, we're completely understaffed. There are no resources. We want to like go out competing with like the BBC. That's not realistic. So a lot of my job has been from a corporate side of trying to create a brand that can then reflect the audience's needs. So a huge part of how I find stories has been data driven. And I think that's a big thing that's been popular for the last 5 years or so. You can't just write what you enjoy writing about. That's old school journalism that doesn't really exist anymore. Fleet Street, overhearing conversations at a pub. That's not how we get our stories anymore. Now it's about looking at the data. Who reads our content already? How can we get them to stay on the page longer, interact with multimedia formats? And how can we sort of lure them in without resorting to yellow journalism or sensationalism? And that's really hard because a lot of people, use clickbait so much. So it's finding that balance and trying to tell stories based on what the audience wants to hear.
And how much of a difficult balance is it between, as you said, you've come into a lot of publications, including Fresh Business Thinking now, to rebrand it, to relaunch it. How difficult is it to strike a balance between the direction that you want a publication to go and what the readers are actually looking at and what they're interested in?
That's such a fantastic question. I think about back in like 2016, I was with a publication that, the board and senior management wanted it to go in a specific direction, but the data was running contrary to it. The readers, the demographic of the readership, the time they spend on the page, the kind of topics they're interested in, it was completely contrary to what the sponsors wanted. And at the end of the day, we are a business and we're trying to make money. And with reducing margins in the media world, as journalists, I mean, this is something I'm sure you can it resonates with you, John, but finding that balance between writing what you want to write about, writing what appeals to your audience, and also making sponsors happy and making sure that, and this is again, more of a sales kind of role, but making sure that the people that we have on board as media like partners, as commercial partners, share our values. And that's a difficult balance to strike. And it's always about like sometimes saying no to partners that just don't align with what we're trying to do. So this is one of the great things about being at Fresh Business Thinking and obviously partnering with GBEA, the values, they're completely aligned on the values, completely aligned on the audience, and bringing the best to our readers. And in the awards community is so tight knit as well that it just adds another level of expertise to our readership. Like we know now our readers are also business award-winning businesses actually. So there's that element.
Yeah, absolutely. And so to you, what makes a great story in the business world?
It's like that postmodern issue, right? Like every story that needs to be told has already been told. So a lot of our job now is almost rewriting, which I'm so like deathly opposed to. Like, I don't want to sit here rewriting press releases. Nobody likes doing that. But, most of these stories have been told. People love triumph over adversity, those kind of stories, like the odds were stacked against somebody and then look at their rise, their meteoric rise to fame. but that's been done to death too. So as journalists, I think, and at least speaking from my experience, it's not about necessarily finding a completely new angle, because that might just end up demotivating you and not doing your readership justice. So for me, it's just telling the stories that have already been told, but finding a new way of doing it. So whether that's finding a new style of presenting content, like knowing how to take a look at the wider industry and bring in the kind of stats that are relevant to make it more of like a human interest piece with like a sort of research angle, or whether to let the readership speak as well and be part of that conversation by having contributors, making sure that for example, business owners who scale their business, they have such a unique perspective. Just they might be talking about the same old story of scaling a business, but the fact that they did it in their industry with their particular circumstances makes it unique. And it's a great opportunity for us to tell that story, but also give them the platform to tell the story. So, at Fresh Business Thinking, we have a contributor strategy where different business owners, all they have to really do is share what they want to write about, talk to me about it, and we can set them up as an author, and they can build up their own sort of host of stories and become a voice of authority in their space.
Yeah, and I think that's probably been a key part of entrepreneurship and kind of branding to an extent over the past certainly 5 years, probably extended a little bit past that as well, where where entrepreneurs and founders are wanting to turn their own story into a brand in itself, to benefit the business. And it's obviously the focus of the Great British Entrepreneur Awards, as I said, being around the story of the entrepreneur and not the balance sheet. So do you think that when you get pitches, are you looking for founder stories more importantly than necessarily what the business does?
I think they have to work it in together, because you might have a very like sexy, media friendly like storyline from a founder's perspective, but if the product doesn't have proof of market validation, like let's say it's just brand new launched business with no real track record, it becomes harder for me to share their story. So there's that element. It's a bit hard to start off as a completely new entrepreneur with no track record and no background. So I think for people who are starting their business and they don't have any PR support, they don't know where to start telling their story, I think the best thing for them to consider is to think about what made them start their business in the first place. Forget that you don't have a track record. Forget that you don't have customers yet. Even if it's like a launch story, we're launching in 3 weeks, I want to go to the media. It might not get picked up by, let's say, the Telegraph, but this is where small business owners can try to find their niche and try to figure out, how did I start my business? Why did I start my business? And who is my end, like who's the end user and who's my audience? And figuring that out will also help you figure out which publications to target. Because getting coverage in the BBC, for example, is fantastic, but it might not actually be relevant. There is such a beauty and importance to reaching a niche, small audience that can literally translate coverage into sales and at the end of the day, help your balance sheet. Even though, yes, we're about the stories, we want to be able to showcase entrepreneurs and their businesses so that they can make money at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that point, I read a story in our online on our local newspaper yesterday of a I think he was 17 or 18 guy who started buying clothes from charity shops at the start of the pandemic and was selling them on Depop. And he said because he was bored, he just carried on. And now he's got this growing business. So yeah, as you said, it's the reason the reason of the relevancy to whatever media it is that gives it that hook. Something that you mentioned a little bit earlier, and I think Chloe mentioned it in her intro, was about the saturation of content and media. With so many different outlets and platforms to share your content, whether it is national newspaper publications, industry publications, websites like Fresh Business Thinking, social platforms, video, all those different platforms. Do you think that has made it easier or harder to get coverage for your business?
I think it's made it a lot easier, and it's also given businesses more control over the narrative. Because if it was let's say the early 90s, and you fax your press release over to the mainstream publications out there, you have to hope a newswire picks it up or someone picks it up the next day or whatever it is. And it's a long game. And you can't really control the narrative, because at the end of the day, the journalist is the middleman who can convert your story and even what you say into whatever suits their own agenda, especially in the UK, when different outlets have their own agenda, their own leanings, and they're very vocal about it. You don't really control how people will perceive your brand. And it's a little different now, because if you now control your channels and find the three major ways of getting your voice out there, like your story out there, there's earned media, which is like, for example, pitching to a journalist. And maybe we can talk about that later as well, like how to reach out to journalists. But pitching to journalists, earning the coverage, that's earned media, right? And then there's paid media, where you can go through the advertorial route, get featured in the supplement of a newspaper, for example, or whatever it is. And there again, you have more control of your narrative. And then the final route is, of course, your owned media, what you actually control. That's your blogs and your social media and your YouTube channels and your TikTok. And I think a lot of times for journalists, because we're so time poor, we're so understaffed, like gone are the days where we had like 20 people in a team, right? I think the best way into a journalist's heart is to provide them with as much information as possible. So not only do you get to control your narrative and how you present yourself to the journalist, but you're also linking them back to your owned media, which can also help get more eyeballs on your channel. So I think it's a lot easier now. It is a bit confusing for readers. And I think that's why when you work with different publications, it's always good to know who their target audience is, so you know that the impact you're having with your coverage, you know exactly where it's going.
Yeah, and something you touched on just there, which links to the kind of the point about pitching. Knowing your target audience and knowing the publisher's target audience, I think you probably have quite a fair bit of experience, just as I do, of receiving pitches, receiving emails from PR teams that you just know are just scattergunned. It's not relevant to us. It's not really what we do. You could just tell that they've gone as far and wide as possible. Although it is a lot more time consuming to really understand each publication, what they do, whether it's relevant for your business and the content that you want to push. Do you think that it's a much more efficient way of getting your coverage out there to really target the ones that really, really suit your business and what you're trying to do?
I think that for businesses that have PR teams, it's like you're paying for that expertise. Those guys understand the landscape. They understand the pressures we're under as journalists. They know how to talk to us. They've got the experience of building relationships with us. That's what they're paid for. They're the experts in that field. So there's absolutely a benefit in having, PRs involved, because they are bringing all of that hard work. You don't have to spend years building a relationship with someone at the Times or the Telegraph. You've got an expert to do that for you. So there's an element of usefulness there. And if there is no budget for PR, there's so many tools out there that we use all the time. John, you use it too. Response Source, Journo, Link, Cision. What's another big one? Find an Expert. I think that's quite new. It's recently launched. These kind of platforms, and even good old-fashioned Twitter. If you look up the hashtag journal request, you can see what journalists are looking for. And there's so many different ways of getting coverage there, whether it's just a general, this is my business, this is my story, or if it's like, I'm an established business, here's a new product or service, or if it's an industry move, like we've hired a new CEO. I can tell you right now, we've hired a new CEO is never going to really make it unless it's a very niche trade publication. But any sort of moves and changes and new announcements, press releases are a good way to get out there, but a quick win and a way to get in the good books of media as well is to look at journal requests and know when you can hijack the news. So, for example, the budget. Do you have an opinion about the budget? How can you add something to the conversation that's unique? What positions your business and your own experience as so unique that your thoughts on the budget announcement will make it in the press? So that's, that kind of thing. Whether it can be even lighthearted stuff like National Donut Day, and you're running a small donut shop. Perfect. So working ahead of time, putting together a little calendar of events, and then knowing what's my unique point of view. How do I stand out from the competition? And then crafting a quote, a soundbite, and then trawling the internet to see what journalists are writing about can really help you just jump in and get that quick media coverage.
Yeah, I think the important point that you mentioned there or alluded to is the why. Why is Fresh Business Thinking? Why is the BBC? Why is the Times going to be interested in what I've got to say on these issues? So it's really thinking about that unique aspect and perspective that you can offer, and that's a really, really great advantage in getting yourself out there. What, in terms of the initial contact with a journalist, what are some of the biggest mistakes that you see?
I don't know if it's a universal experience, John. I mean, but it happens to me anyway. I think what really puts me off is when people get in touch and they either, it's obvious that they've pasted the email to like multiple people, like you said, the scattergun approach, but they try to personalize it and then they use the wrong name or the wrong title. It's like, if you're going to personalize it, otherwise just go dear all. Like, I actually would be more open to a dear all scattergun kind of email with a good story than someone calling me, I don't know, Priscilla, and pitching to a competitor. And you're like, that's bad, that's embarrassing. It's just as bad. Like, you would never expect me to write about a business and misspell the founder's name or misquote them. It's just professional integrity, I guess. And I know it can happen when you're, swamped, and PR might be the last thing on your mind when you're running your business. You might be like, listen, I've got to cover my sales. I need to grow my business. I don't have time to like schmooze with journalists. But if you are going to make the effort, absolutely make sure that you're sending it to the right person. Maybe before you send it to somebody else, so just look into the last few articles they've done. See, this is what PRs would do for you, though. PRs would give you a briefing document. They will literally tell you, these are the articles this person's written before, or, these are the topics they've covered, a small bio on who you're talking to, and even potential questions they might ask you, so you're prepared. If you don't have PR, the onus is on you to do that research. So just know who you're talking to, what kind of stories they cover, get their name spelled correctly. And, also, oh gosh, because we are so time poor, we're also bombarded with the millions of emails, like legit thousands of emails a day. So if you don't hear back, it's not necessarily a rejection. It could just be like drowned out in thousands of other emails. So I personally don't mind a follow-up. I think it's quite nice when people follow up. I know some other journalists hate it though. What do you think? Where do you stand on follow-ups?
I think it's one of those, and it is a personal preference, and like you said, we do get thousands of pitches every day, quite literally thousands of pitches every day. So it is really difficult to get back to them all, and a follow-up can be really, really helpful in picking up the ones that you might have otherwise missed. But I think it is, like you said, taking the time to understand not necessarily what the publication's preference is, but even reporter to reporter. So if I hated phone calls, try and find out. Otherwise, if you phone me, it's not going to end well. If you didn't like follow-ups, that's not going to end well. So having that kind of understanding, reporter to reporter, can be just as important as publication to publication.
Agreed.
And so obviously we've just mentioned thousands of emails coming in. What do you look at? What do you look out for? What makes a pitch or an email stand out for you? Whether it's the subject line, that the first line of the body of the email. What makes Praseeda look through her inbox and say, I'm going to look at that one. I'm going to read that one in full.
I'm going to speak for me, but I'm also going to speak based on like the different panels I've been on. I've been on a couple of Meet the Journalist panels. So again, this is something that's come up so much in the industry. So this is true of even like, because obviously we're digital, so we do mixed formats. We do content in terms of even podcasts and video, but mostly written. But even for television broadcasters, it's very similar. So when an email comes in, the subject line and the sort of preview, the pre-header is kind of enough to know whether to open it or not. So if you nail that subject line, it's almost like it's a nice reflection of how our job's cut out for us too. If we don't nail the headline of a story, no one's going to click into it, right? Similarly, if these founders or business owners want to share their story, they've got to think of a fun, clever way to showcase their quirky sort of nature. Not that they have to force the quirkiness, like just be authentic. That is also a complete side note, but our readership, the global sort of appetite for content has evolved. So people are looking for more authenticity. So if you can be authentic, don't force quirkiness, don't force purpose, because purpose-driven businesses are so big right now. A lot of businesses are trying to backtrack and find their purpose. Like, it should already be there. And if it's not, then maybe work on that before you go to the media, right? But going back to like the subject line, that's really important for sure. But also, if something isn't going to be picked up right now, doesn't mean it won't get picked up in the future. Sometimes, I'll be writing about a larger topic. For example, recently I did a piece on the funding gap when it comes to female founders versus male founders. And I have so much data, apart from the research that I've done, apart from the interviews I've done, so much data just sitting in my inbox from press releases and surveys that were done months ago, but it's still relevant. So coverage that was pushed months ago might only see the light of day months later, but it's going to be in a larger, more in-depth piece. So there's always a benefit in sharing out your quote on different topics, your perspective on different topics, any survey research you've got, any research into your customer behavior, because you never know when that can be picked up at a later date by the media.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that partly links in with building a relationship with a publication and with a journalist, because the ones that go for the scattergun approach and with content that really isn't relevant for the publication. If you're doing that, if you're not building the relationship with the authenticity, as you mentioned, then the one time that they send through something that is golden for us, we're probably more than likely going to see that name come in the inbox and think, oh, it's them, ignore it. So it is that aspect of really, really building that relationship over the time, regardless of whether you've got a PR team or you're doing it kind of in-house. And it's something that just came to me in terms of, a lot of startups kind of haven't got the budget to outsource their PR. Is there a certain level or kind of point in a business where you think it's almost essential to outsource your PR? Is there kind of a turning point where it's right now we need to go external with this?
I try not to talk about my shady past. It's not shady. But I actually did a stint in PR, and I try not to talk about it too much because I feel like other journalists judge me so much. I bet you want to roll your eyes right now. I can feel it, John. But like, it's just a natural sort of like symbiotic relationship we have with PRs, right? And there are so many overlaps. It's always about storytelling, and it's always about positioning, right? And brand identity. So there's so many overlaps there. So I went into PR very briefly though. And it was a really fun job because I could see how the sort of bigger machine works, the marketing machine works, and how to tell stories from a different side, from a biased side, because you're being paid to do it. And that's so different to what we're used to, where we're more like unbiased and trying to present the wider story. So, when I was like pitching for new business and so on, I was in B2B tech PR. So at the time, a lot of the pitches we were doing were with like really hot, up and coming, multi-billion-dollar funded businesses that got VC backing and stuff, right? So they want a hotshot PR company because they feel like that's the right thing to do, not because they necessarily know what to do with PR. So this is another thing I've noticed, like now that I'm a journalist again, now that I've recovered from my PR stint, is that a lot of businesses think that they should do PR just for the sake of PR because that's what everyone's doing. If you don't have a unique point of view right now, if you don't have a voice built yet, like it takes time to craft your voice, like as a brand. What's our tone? What's our style of voice? How do we talk to our customers? How do I translate how we talk to the customers to how I present my brand to the media? It takes time to figure that out. And it's okay if you haven't figured it out yet, because it's all a journey as you grow as a company. But if you're not ready to do it, and if you don't have a new story to tell, if you don't have a different perspective to tell, it could possibly even do more harm than good going to the media, because you might keep getting rejected, and no one likes getting rejected a bunch of times. It might make you feel like you don't have a story worth telling. You absolutely have a story worth telling. You just don't know how to tell it yet. I think every business owner has a story worth telling. I think every human being has a book in them, and it's just about knowing how to find that. That happens with practice. So I personally think that in the moments when you're growing your business and you remind yourself why you're doing it, the late nights, missing your kids' dance recitals, or, just really like the struggle that goes into building a business, the dark side, people don't want to talk about it, but that's where the gems are. The struggles you went through, the hardships to get you to where you are today, and the lighthearted moments, the rapid growth, or even the steady, slow growth, the slog, or a competitor, a big competitor coming in and cannibalizing the market. All of those things still can be told to the media as a story. You just need to know how to do it. So I say, if you're going to consider PR, try getting to a stage where you have so many stories to tell, you just don't know how to do it, and you don't have the time to spend into building those relationships with journalists. Once you know that this media coverage, what's the point of it? Is it a vanity exercise? Do you just want to see your name in the press? Or are you trying to help other entrepreneurs? Or are you trying to increase sales by going through this marketing option? Because there are other ways to market yourself, not the media. So it's really about checking in with yourself and seeing where you are in the business and what you want to do, and why do you want media coverage? Like, what's the point?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really, really great point. And, it kind of links back to the why. Why are you on this campaign? Why are you trying to get it out there, and what have you got that's different to offer? I think that was a really, really, really nicely put point there. I am conscious of time and the number of questions that we have got through, so I think I'll probably switch to those. So we've had a few questions in from the audience. This one is from an anonymous attendee, and I think we've touched on it slightly, but I think there's certainly no harm in going into a little bit more detail. They have asked, what do you think is the best approach to building relationships with journalists? I guess from the perspective of from the business owner without a PR team, and how do you go about doing that?
It's so hard to generalize, but I would say most journalists that I know don't like talking on the phone. I know you're one of them, John.
Talking about
Like the thing, it's because we don't have the time. That's the only reason. I don't think we're as antisocial as people might think we are. Although sometimes I get shocked when I go for like media events and I meet other journalists and I'm like, wow, why are you so awkward? Like a lot of journalists are socially awkward. They just know how to turn it on for the cameras or for their writing when they're writing behind the scenes. But a lot of times I think they're very socially awkward, present company excluded, obviously. But I think when you're trying to make these relationships, forge these relationships with journalists, social media is your best bet. You know, first of all, find out how engaged they are with their followers. Sometimes you have journalists that are actively building up their personal brand. You have a lot of them actually that enjoy being on the ranking lists and, you know, sharing stuff. And I'm one of those people. I love it. I love trying to engage with my readership. I want to know all the businesses out there. I want to know how you did what you're doing. And I want to be part of that journey. I want to be able to help these businesses get to where they are today. So I think getting to know your journalists by reading their content or engaging with their content, if it's a podcast or video. And also don't limit yourself to journalists. Try to get involved with people who are still storytellers. They don't have to be journalists. They could be influencers. They could be vloggers, bloggers, what have you. For example, like forum posts on Mumsnet, you know, they get picked up as story ideas often, not just by like women and children's magazines, but even me. Like I've had story leads from Mumsnet, and that was a forum post. Reddit is another one as well, where I get story leads all the time. Clubhouse is hot and heavy right now. It's on the rise. TikTok. I mean, I love a good scroll sesh on TikTok. So I think reach out to journalists one-on-one on social media. That's a great start. Go for networking events and just, you know, when you're at a press event or an industry event, just have a look. People will be there with the press tag once it's safe to go back to live events. You'll see people with the press tag, just go over and have a chat and see where they're at. But yeah, just put your brand out there on social media and they might come to you.
Yeah, brilliant. I think yeah, I'm 100% one that doesn't like conversations on the phone. But yeah, I think it's more you know, we're in such a digital world that you know, the proof is in the pudding for us as journalists is the content of the press release. So I do have so many really interesting conversations over the phone. And you know, their pitch sounds wonderful, but I'm not going to approve anything to go on our website until I actually see the content. And yeah, as you mentioned, very time poor in our industry. Another question comes from Dan, who asks, where does user-generated content fit into modern journalism and modern PR?
That's such a good question. I saw that in the Q&A panel and I was like, what's UGC? Can someone Google that for me? So thank you. Thanks, John. User-generated content, this whole crowdsourcing content, grassroots level information. I'm so glad that Dan asked that because a lot of what we do, because we are time poor, does rely on different business owners and PRs sort of doing some of the work for us, not all of it, but supplying a good headshot. Make sure you have like a press kit or some sort of assets ready to go, right? That already does a lot of work for us. So having like images of your product or your services, if possible, of yourself as a spokesperson, and, you know, having your content, if it's written, oh gosh, just make sure there are no typos or grammatical issues, stuff like that really helps. But from a completely user-generated perspective, that I think is still too early. Like there are some websites, especially in the US, like Startup Bros. I love those guys. There are a lot of websites, and in the UK as well, we have a couple. Business to Community, I think, is one of them as well, where you can set up your own profile and start posting your own comment and try to like elevate yourself as a thought leader. I think there's a lot of benefit in that. And in fact, Fresh Business Thinking, we're transitioning to that model. Of course, we're part of Ideas Forums. So Ideas Forums is also on the verge of launching a very much grassroots level user-generated experience where different I want to say experts, but it's really how you position yourself. So like different business owners or lawyers, accountants, what have you, can come on board, set up their own account, and start sharing content, share their perspectives, share their news, and even set up their own webinars within our system. Another thing that we are a big fan of, and we're in the process of setting up, is we partner with Shoutout. And I know that GBEA also has this wonderful partnership with Shoutout, which is also a small business, and they're phenomenal at storytelling because it puts the onus on user-generated content. So as a small business, all you have to do is, once you get this link from us, just answer the questions that show up on your screen, film it on your phone in landscape mode or on your computer, and it's almost like a ready-to-go piece of content. So what that means for journalists like me is that we just have to compile it, and our story is already there in a multimedia format. So yeah, there's a lot of room. I don't think mainstream media is using it yet. So that's an opportunity for digital publications like us to corner the market, hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got another one from Bridget, who owns a arts and crafts business and a gallery as well. And I suspect the first part of this will probably be a little bit more difficult to answer. But she asks, which magazine would be best to approach, and what type of story are they likely to be interested in? Would we have to buy advertising before we can get some editorial?
Okay, that's an amazing question. And I love that Bridget came in explaining like your niche, which is fantastic. So a small business making arts and crafts. Oh, the question disappeared. I just wanted a little, whoa, hold on. Let me just check on the panel. Small business making arts and crafts and running a gallery. Okay, so I think the conversation around advertorials is a great way to speed up the kind of coverage you want to receive. But the thing is, it really depends on what you're trying to do here. If, Bridget, in your case, if you're trying to get more publicity around what your business does, and you're running a gallery, then your end user is almost defined that way. So I think for all small businesses, if you think about who is your end user, who are you selling to, who are you trying to get attention from, how many eyeballs do you want on your service or your product? I think that's what helps you figure out which publication to go for. So for an arts and crafts business, there are niche publications that cater to that industry, and websites as well. And considering how Pinterest is also another social media platform that attracts that kind of end user, I would think that there's more benefit in putting in budget for social media advertising rather than media advertorials when you're starting, or even just starting to grow your business. I think there's a room for advertorials, but that's later down the growth cycle. So I think what type of stories would be of interest? If you're, okay, this is the thing. I don't know how much time we have, John, but I'll try to zip through. If you're running a business and you're trying to get coverage, there's so many different avenues. Either you can go with the founder story route and then find business publications that'll be interested in your founder story, why you started the business and what you're doing and how you've grown. Or you can go down the product service route, figure out which industry you're in, who your end users are, and try to build rapport with journalists in your industry and get sector specific coverage. And another type of thing you can do is, if you're trying to raise funding, then you can try to get into titles that focus on like the type of funding you raised, whether it's a debt finance or crowdfunding or what have you. So in this case, I think focusing on your niche, finding publications that cater to your niche audience, and hold off on paying for editorial is my opinion.
Excellent. I think an important point to add there as well is, obviously it's completely dependent on what your type of business is, but I suspect with Bridget, which runs a gallery, that you're going to want to get in front of the eyes of people in your local area. So the regional avenue isn't necessarily about the unique aspects of your business or industry focused. It's just the fact that someone from your area is doing this, and that can be a really nice tie for a business that is particularly regional, particularly local, and physical. We've probably got time for one more, and this one is a little bit long, so I will read it word for word. It comes from, sorry, they haven't put their first name, but M Lyons. So this person asks, can we also talk about the how? In the past, there have been systems to do press cuttings and supply journalist lists. However, in recent times, the information provided is just a personal email. This means that the information on journalist specialization gets lost. For those of us who cannot afford PR, using a system like Meltwater to get lists helps with getting in front of specialist journalists. But the real weakness is knowing how to get specialist journalists. Are there any go-to resources you can recommend?
Honestly, when I was in the PR side of things, I knew about Meltwater because it's also good at getting clippings for our clients and stuff. But as a journalist, what I really enjoy is the more boutique niche services out there. There are smaller businesses that do this. There's Find an Expert that I mentioned earlier. I wish I had it off the top of my, there are so many out there. If you just search for small businesses that specialize in journalist relationships or just coverage. So Journal Link is a really good one, and Find an Expert's a really good one. With Find an Expert, you can literally position yourself as an expert and at the same time get access to the various journalists that are signed up for that service. And another thing is there are so many lists on Twitter that are put together by PRs, and they're free and easy to access, where you can look at small business journalists or tech journalists or AR journalists. There's so many lists that are free and easy to access. So I would say that's the easiest way to do it, where you at least get to know what the specialization is for these journalists. Because you're absolutely right, Em, that if you're just mass mailing people, then your message gets diluted.
Yeah, and I think Chloe is quite helpfully just put the link to those couple of resources into the chat if you want to take a look at them. We've probably got time to squeeze one more in, so this one comes from Emma, and I'll read it for word because it's slightly longer. So she says, "We're a social enterprise helping companies and communities thrive through our inspirational singing services. We specialize in workplace well-being, leadership and team building, and reinvest profits into our community services, working with people with long-term health conditions. During COVID, we won a number of awards, including a Prime Minister's Award for our services. We've kept reaching out to journalists and often get told we've covered enough choirs or great story, but we can't feature you right now, or just don't get a reply. Any advice?"
I think journalists are just jerks. No, I'm kidding. But there is an element of that. I think sometimes in our industry, because we are so time poor, people either get kind of snippy or don't respond or push a story away because they just don't have the time. They might be lovely people, but they just don't have the time. I think because you're a social enterprise, there are, again, niche publications that highlight social enterprises, nonprofit organizations, and businesses that focus on doing good. So there's a lot of opportunities from that perspective of going down the niche route. I think because of the human interest angle, this story that you're sharing, Emma, could very well resonate with mainstream media. They just might not have the resources or time, because we're also an industry that was laid off a lot. Like, a lot of us were made redundant. In fact, before I joined Fresh Business Thinking, I was made redundant, and this opportunity came by, and I'm lucky to be here. So I think a lot of us are working with tiny teams, bouncing back, and there's so much personal issues going on in everyone's life as well. I think it's only easy that these things can sometimes slip through the cracks. So my suggestion is stay persistent, keep trying to push your story out there. And if one style didn't work, tweak the subject line, find another way of telling the same story. Just there's always different angles. And if you help the journalists halfway with creating new angles, you might have a better chance of reaching them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to add to that as well, Emma, as we've said, research the publications and the type of content that they're pushing out. Fresh Business Thinking has just gone through a rebrand, and look at the content streams that they're focusing on. One of Fresh Business Thinking's is well-being, mental health, well-being in the workplace. So look for those publications, and Emma, send us an email to editor@freshbusinessthinking.com, because just reading that brief intro, it sounds like you've got a really interesting story, and as Praseeda said, a really nice human interest story. So it sounds like something that we would, exactly the type of thing that we would want to cover on Fresh Business Thinking. But yeah, I think that probably takes us a little bit past the time that we've got. Thank you again so much for joining us today, and apologies again for the late start. So we really do appreciate you sticking with us a little bit later than planned. But with that, I will pass back to Chloe, and thank you, Praseeda.
Well, before that, can I just make a quick plug? Absolutely. For Fresh Business Thinking? So just like you said, John, I bet of the attendees here, all of you have a unique story to be told. This is why, we're absolutely inviting all of you to just, in fact, it could be a good exercise for you to practice your pitch, practice with us. That's why we're here. That's why I'm here as well. Like, we want to be able to support this community. So if you could maybe try to find a way to do a quick pitch, story pitch, and send it to either editors at Fresh Business Thinking or even directly to me, Praseeda at freshbusinessthinking.com. I'm happy to take a look at it and maybe even give you feedback if I can with my time poor nature. Also, please follow us on our social channels and drop me a note on LinkedIn as well. Chloe, I don't know if you can possibly drop my LinkedIn in there as well, but yeah, I'm always looking to connect, and that's another way I get stories too. So thanks.
No problem. Thank you, Praseeda. I have included John and Praseeda's LinkedIn just a bit further up in the comments if you do wish to connect with them. I've also included a link to the Fresh Business Thinking site for you to have a look, and any emails that are relevant as well. Thank you very much for joining us today, Praseeda. Before we sign off, if you wanted the audience to come away with one clear takeaway from today's session, what would it be?
Oh, that's a really tough question. I think I couldn't help but notice one of the questions in the panel, so I'm going to focus on that. Somebody asked anonymously about news hijacking, and another person also asked about where to find pictures, like where do you find pictures to go with your press release. I just want to give as practical advice as possible. So quickly, news hijacking has become more important than ever now. People don't have time to write stories. We're running out of ideas, and a lot of mental health issues affect journalists too. Most of my friends in the industry are struggling. We're really struggling with our boundaries between what's personal and what's professional. So if you can help us with our job, like with our workload, we will take it. So news hijacking is absolutely important. And for pictures, you can check out free resources like Unsplash, Pexels, Pixabay. There are loads of free, royalty-free image websites you can use to add pictures to your products and services.
Thank you, Praseeda. Series 4 of the GBA Lightbulb sessions will begin in 2 weeks' time with Jess Bailey of Crowdfund 360, who will be discussing how to create the perfect crowdfunding campaign. If there is anything you'd like to catch up on from today's session, we'll be sending out a replay of this recording later on today, and you can find the replay and future sessions at www.lightbulb-sessions.heysummit.com. Thank you very much for joining us today, and thank you again, Praseeda and John.
Thank you.